Welcome back to Learn Astrology with Mary. My name's Mary English. You can find me at www.maryenglish.com, maryenglish.co.uk, and UK Astrologer. Hello. I'm going to attempt the impossible today. I'm recording this at the weekend of the 1st and 2nd of November because, well, that's when I'm recording it, but I want to talk about the Gunpowder plot, which is the basis of a celebration that happens every year in the UK, and it's called Bonfire Night or Guy Fawkes Night or Fireworks Night. It's got lots of different titles, and it happens on the 5th of November, and that's just coming up. So this isn't a pagan episode at all, because that's the thing called Samhain, and that's not the date that I'm talking about. But because we're coming up to Guy Fawkes, and it's such a big celebration in the UK. It's not as big as Christmas, and probably Halloween is taking over a bit more from it. I'm not too sure, but for a definite fact, the amount of fireworks that gets set off starts to increase the nearer that we get to the 5th of November. So we're going to do a little history lesson today. We're going to do the background of the bonfire plot, or the gunpowder plot. We're going to talk about the chart for Guy Fawkes, the man that is associated with it, but we're going to also be talking about the realities of it. And I have been struggling with the calendar for it because, according to the history books, the different calendars that were in place, there was the Julian calendar, and then later there was Gregorian calendar, and then when you start to go down the rabbit hole of doing history research, which flipping calendars, and I keep reading that the Gregorian calendar, who was invented by the Pope, and the British wasn't a particularly popish country, because that's the background of all of this gunpowder plot thing. We didn't adopt it in the UK until much later on. So the charts that I've constructed, I've used the Julian calendar, which would have been the calendar for these dates. Plus, on astro.com, it's really awful that they don't start doing the ephemeris until a date that doesn't, well, in fact it's an earlier date, and the UK is still using the Julian calendar, so I can't prove a lot of the information that I'm showing you today by demonstrating with an ephemeris, because the ephemeris will be wrong. I can't find an ephemeris for the Julian bloody calendar, but I can on astro.com. When you put the data in for a date of birth, if you know that the date that you're using, they'll still be using the Julian calendar, what you do is you put the date, so you put the day, the month, and then the year, and then just after the year you write the initials JUL, which brings up the chart with the Julian calendar. And you can also put Julian in the transit box. So I've tried my best to make this as accurate as possible. Now, I'm not going to quote from Wikipedia for change. I'm quoting from the National Archives because I wanted to use British referencing for the information that I'll be sharing with you. So I'm quoting from the National Archives about the thing called the Gunpowder plot. So I'm just going to read you this little segment. It's not very long, so you can get a bit of background to how this even happened, what it was all about. So during the reign of Queen Elizabeth I, followers of the Roman Catholic religion in England had faced serious difficulties, including harsh fines and risk of imprisonment or violence. Catholic priests, vital to the practice of the religion, were banned, and government spies tried hard to round up those who were secretly working in the kingdom. Now, when she died, the person that eventually took her place was a guy called James I. So he came to the throne. Catholics in England thought that things would get better for them, but James kept all of Elizabeth's tough laws against Catholics. Very early in his reign, a group of Catholic noblemen decided that the king would have to be killed for things to change. On the 26th of October 1605, Thomas Ward, a servant of the Catholic Lord Monteagle, was given a letter by an inverted commas, an unknown man to give to his master. When Monteagle read the letter, he found it was a warning to stay away from the opening of Parliament due in a few days. He gave the letter directly to the Privy Council and the King of Whitehall. Although the conspirators knew the letter had been passed to the government, they decided to go ahead as planned, trusting that their explosives expert was unknown to the authorities. After the explosion, the plans were that certain plotters would lead an uprising in the Midlands. They'd kidnap Princess Elizabeth, James I's 9-year-old daughter, from her household at Combe Abbey. Using her as a figurehead, they would rule the country and restore the rights of Catholics. However, their explosive expert was disturbed as he arrived to light the fuse. The trial of the 8 surviving conspirators was held in the same room they tried to blow up, Westminster Hall, within the Parliament building. All 8 were found guilty, and by the end of January 1606, all 8 had been executed. The plotters were hung, drawn and quartered. The heads were then set upon poles as a warning to others. As a result of the plot, James I became more popular, having survived an attempt on his life. However, it became harder for Catholics to practice their religion or play a part in society. Finally, there is no doubt that Guy Fawkes is remembered incorrectly as the main plotter, a myth perpetuated as generations of children celebrate bonfire night. So that's a historical account of a summary of what happens. So the story is there's a guy called, so I'm only going to give you a little potted Mary version of this, guy called Robert Catesby, who was born on the 3rd of March 1572 using the Julian Calendar. We've got his date of birth and where he was born. And he was a Catholic, born into a Catholic family, and he sort of got it into his head that the king was a baddie and he was going to do something about it. And he got a whole bunch of people together, and the plan was they were going to blow up Parliament when the King James, was going to be there with a whole host of other people having some sort of parliamentary thing. Parliament wasn't like it is today. It was a different set of houses in the same location. And he was going to blow him up, and as I just read, they were going to capture his daughter and then blah, 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 blah. Anyway, none of this actually came to pass. And I thought, what information have we got for the people that are involved? Have we got any dates of birth? Well, we do. We've got Robert Catesby, who was the leader, is that right? The ringleader of this whole daft idea. And so we're going to start with this chart, like, of all the signs of the zodiac, who's going to be the one that's most out of touch with reality? Because they've got this, they planned the blowing up of it pretty well. They managed to accumulate enough gunpowder to be able to do it, and dry wood and stuff underneath the parliamentary buildings, and then eventually a flat that was near to the premises or just under it, that came up for rental, and they got people involved in it. So the blowing up of it was reasonably well organised, but the idea that they'd be able to do that and get away clean with it is just like, anyway, the man himself, he's a sun sign Pisces. Now, by using the Julian calendar, this is the chart that I created, because definitely in the UK in 1572, the Julian calendar was a thing that was used, and we have a date of birth for him. I don't have a time that he was born. No one's going to let us know that. But I've got the location, Henley and Arden, and I've got the date. So it's sun sign Pisces and moon in Scorpio. Only a Pisces would be daft enough to do this type of thing. Today it would be classified as terrorism. Plotting anything against governments and countries and stuff is classified as terrorism. I would have thought if he was around today and they'd arrested him doing that, he'd be tried as a terrorist. And why was he like that? Now, no one's written anything astrological about him as far as I can make out. And if you were doing astrology back then, you would not be using Neptune, Uranus and Pluto. So if you looked at this person's chart, you just think, oh, he's a sun sign Pisces, moon in Scorpio, can hold a bit of a grudge possibly. Mercury in Pisces retrograde, and you'd make your diagnosis of that. But just because the planets weren't used didn't mean they didn't exist. And when he was born, the sun was 22 degrees Pisces and Pluto was 23 degrees Pisces. So this is a man that's born with Pluto conjunct the sun. So what's the sun all about? That's who I am, that's my ego, and Pluto's about deep change and transformation. So this is somebody who probably in real life had a difficult relationship with his dad, because anything that conjuncts the sun indicates something to do with the father. But Pluto is also modern day ruler to his moon in Scorpio. Because I don't know what time of day he's born, and I've used 12 o'clock. Maybe the moon was a little bit nearer to his Saturn. So I'll just let you know what the planets are. So he's got Neptune, Gemini, Mars retrograde in Libra, Moon and Saturn in Scorpio, Uranus in Capricorn. He's got Mercury retrograde in Pisces, Sun Pisces, Pluto Pisces, and then he's got Jupiter and Venus in Aries. So you can look him up on Wikipedia, you can read all the blurb all about him, what he did, what he didn't do. That's not what this podcast is about. It's about the Gunpowder plot itself. He was the main instigator of it, and the ideas guy that came up with it, and managed to get people that were also Catholics or sympathetic to the Catholic cause at that time to go along with his crazy height. He's got natally Sun square Neptune, so he's not going to be in touch with reality too much. But when I found the chart, I was like sort of chuckling to myself, oh, it's only a flipping Pisces that could do that. We've got Sun conjunct Jupiter as well, but Jupiter is 2 degrees Aries, so it's conjunct his Sun, but it's out of sign but within orb. So I'll post all these charts up on the show notes so you can see them. But he's got Sun conjunct Pluto, okay, so he's not at the square to Neptune. He's not going to be 100% rational all of the time. He's going to be passionate about stuff, but whether or not it does him any good is anybody's guess. So in the story of the Gunpowder plot, eventually Guy, who is the person that's supposed to be looking after all the things that are going to catch light, because he was the only person, he was a soldier, he knew about gunpowder and how it worked and how he would be able to blow the place up. Robert wasn't there when Guy got arrested. He was somewhere else, and somewhere up north from London, and he came to a very nasty end. I think the word got out and he got into a fight and he was killed. I'm not going to give you all the gory details because they are pretty gory, but we have the date that he died, which is the 8th of November in 1605, because the actual date of the event of them discovering all of the firearms was the 5th of November. So this is the 8th of November, a little while afterwards, and he's sort of like final shootout type of thing. In fact, I think he was killed by a bullet. So him and one of the other blokes was killed. So we got the transits for that, and transiting Mercury is very near to his moon. He's near enough having a Mars return. The moon had just gone into the sign of Pisces on the day that he died. I don't know what time of day he died. Nobody's going to give me that. But the moon is just going into Pisces. So it's 0 degrees and 20 minutes at the time that when you create a transit for. So all of his life, so he's born with Pluto in the sign of Pisces. All of his life, Pluto has been transiting past his Jupiter, then his sun sign, and when he dies, Pluto's a distance away from his Venus, because the nature of the way that his Pluto is, it's a bigger degree than his sun sign. He would have had his whole life under the influence of Pluto, so big sort of dramas here and there. And Uranus was in the sign of Taurus, which as I speak today, Uranus has just retrograded back into Taurus. I think it's only just gone back in. Hold on, let me double check. Oh, not quite. It doesn't do it until the 9th of November. It's just early degrees into Gemini today as I'm recording this. But on the 9th, it will return back into Taurus. And Neptune is now in the sign, so this is when he dies, mind. Neptune is now 11 degrees Virgo, and he's got his natal Mercury retrograde at 10 degrees Pisces, so Neptune is opposition to his natal Mercury. The sun's going into the sign of Pisces. It's actually conjunct to his Chiron, so I don't need a time of birth to get the Chiron. So the outer planets are Pluto in Aries, Uranus in Taurus, and Neptune in Virgo. So this person was born under some very unlucky stars. Apparently when he died, he had a picture of the Virgin Mary in his hand. It's like, which bit of it's a lovely story, but was that actually true? Sun's in Scorpio, Mercury's in Scorpio, Jupiter's in Capricorn. He's natally got Uranus in Capricorn. So I'm sure there's some people listening. You were probably born with Uranus in Capricorn. So hello, if that was you. So this person was born with that. So that's his death. Okay, so he's not the person that everybody talks about, but I just wanted to point out and to introduce his chart that he's the person that had the grand idea to do all of this. The person that is, inverted commas, celebrated for having been involved in the plans to blow up Parliament is Guy Fawkes, and most people in the UK have heard the name. And people didn't start burning effigies of him straight away afterwards, after the event, when, well, I'll read you all of those things. So Guy Fawkes was born. Now, we've got the date that he was baptised, and back then you were baptised 3 or so days after you were born. And back then, because you couldn't practice to be a Catholic, his parents weren't Catholic, his parents were Protestant, but his father died when he was quite young, and his mother remarried a Catholic, so he was brought up a Catholic by his stepdad. So they're estimating that he was born on the 13th of April in 1570. So Robert, let me just go back to his chart again, was the year that he was born was 1572. So he was a couple of years younger than Guy, but they're about the same age when all of this happens. So basically both of them were in their early 30s when they died. Whatever date he would have been, he definitely would have been a Taurus. So 13th of April. Don't forget those dates aren't going to relate to how the dates are now because it's Julian Calendar. Yeah? So sun sign Taurus on the 13th. The sun is 2 degrees into the sign of Taurus. And I was sort of thinking, well, if you're a sun sign Taurus, you're going to be sort of dependable on the rest of it. And but what sign of the zodiac's more likely to take the risks that he did? Because the moon is changing sign on that day, and I thought, oh, do you know, if that is his date of birth, 13th of April, I can't, having read all the story and stuff, he didn't sound at all like a person who got moon in Cancer. So I thought, do you know, I must have a sort of, because the only choice is moon in Cancer or moon in Leo, and I thought it's more likely to have moon in Leo. So I've made his chart, not that I could change it, just by doing the 12 o'clock, moon in Leo made more sense, yeah. He's got, and don't forget, we could be a date or two either side, but generally speaking, 3 days before your christening, they've got definitely the baptism certificates and whatever. Mercury in Aries retrograde. So him and the guy that comes up with his grand idea, both of them have got Mercury retrograde. But Guy Fawkes himself didn't have his Mercury in the same sign as his sun sign. He had Venus and Mercury retrograde. It doesn't matter if we move days, those are still going to be the same planets. Mars definitely in Leo, Jupiter in Aquarius, Saturn in Libra, Uranus in Capricorn, just like your man earlier, Neptune in Gemini, and Pluto in Pisces. But he's born 2 years before. He's born in 1570. He's got a grand trine in his chart. He's got a grand trine. He's also got a kite shape. Robert Gatsby's got a sort of weird locomotive-y shape thing, but he doesn't have outer planets conjunct to the sun like Robert does. He does have Mercury opposition to Saturn, so Saturn's retrograde, opposition Mercury retrograde, and his day job was a soldier. That's what he did. So grew up. His dad died. He inherited a bit of land. I think he eventually sold the land, went abroad. I think he fought for a while in Spain, and came back to the UK and got involved in plans to blow up Parliament. And because he'd been a soldier and knew how gunpowder worked, he was the one that was roped into the job of doing it. And don't forget, it's not as if anybody forced him to do this. He was just as much wanting to do it as the other people there. So I'll just read you a bit more information about what happens. So Guy Fawkes wasn't the ringleader. While Guy Fawkes is the name synonymous with the 1605 Gunpowder plot, the charismatic mastermind behind it all was Robert Catesby. Catesby was a devout Catholic investing in converting England from Protestant to Catholicism. He was also a participant in the failed 1601 Essex Rebellion and shared Guy Fawkes' fanatical Catholicism. Fawkes' role in the gunpowder plot was to light the fuse, detonating the 36 barrels of gunpowder. His knowledge of explosives came from fighting for Spain against its Protestant enemies. The Spanish War is also where he adopted the Italianized version of his name, Guido. It was under his name that he signed his confession, under this name. The plotters numbered an unlucky 13. The participants in the gunpowder plot were predominantly members of the gentry with a shared devotion to Catholicism, but included in their number was Catesby's servant Thomas Bates, who stumbled across the plot and took their number to a rather ominous 13. The plotters were angered by King James's signing of a peace treaty with Catholic Spain. In their eyes, this was a monumental blow to their hopes that Spain would invade England and restore Catholicism. The gathered plotters swore an oath on a prayer book and schemed to blow up the entire Houses of Parliament. They hoped that by killing King James I and his heir, Prince Henry, they could launch a pro-Catholic uprising. The next stage of the plan was to indoctrinate James's young daughter Elizabeth, installing her on the throne with Catholic noblemen ruling on her behalf. The original 11th century building where they were planning to do this had undergone many alterations and extensions. This resulted in a mismatch of meeting rooms, apartments, shops and even taverns within its walls. At the time of the gunpowder plot, the large room that the lords met in, was originally built in the 13th century as the Queen's bedchamber. This multitude of clashing people and businesses resulted in minimal security. In March 1605, an undercroft below the House of Lords became available. The plotters found gunpowder easy to obtain due to the end of the war with Spain, so Guy Fawkes assumed the identity of John Johnson and began to transfer the gunpowder. The plot began to unravel several days before the 5th of November. So I talked to you a bit earlier about Lord Monteagle and receiving the cryptic letter. With heightened suspicions, the King ordered searches of Parliament. Guy Fawkes was discovered on the 4th of November with a suspicious amount of firewood. The gunpowder was found in the early hours of the 5th, prompting Fawkes' arrest and subsequent torture. Days of gruelling torment resulted in a confession and an order for his execution. With the names of the other plotters uncovered, investigators moved quickly to arrest them. 8 plotters made a final stand against 200 men at Holby House in Staffordshire. Most were killed or wounded, while the few remaining survivors were hung, drawn and quartered. That was Robert, but he got killed. So the guy on the bonfire was originally the Pope. So the gunpowder plot became infamous and fuelled anti-Catholic sentiment. In 1606, it became mandatory for all English churches to host a service on the 5th of November. Soon, other forms of celebration began, taking the form of bonfires, puppet shows and official artillery salutes. In 1673, crowds began the practice of parading around an effigy and stringing it up above a bonfire, initially in the form of the Pope. It was during the 1800s that the figure burnt above the bonfire became the familiar Guy Fawkes of today. These days, bonfire night celebrations are stripped of their anti-Catholic sentiment. Guy Fawkes now seems to hold a more sympathetic anti-hero role in today's popular culture, whilst the fireworks, bonfire and revelry take centre stage. So the story is they searched and they found him, and he said, "Oh, my name's John Johnson. I'm just here mooching about." And then King James decided to send somebody back in there, and this time they now found hidden behind all the firewood, all of the explosives, and they got hold of Guy Fawkes. They've started to torture him. Originally he was put on, it's the most horrific story, they originally put him on a rack, and he didn't confess until 8th of November. Don't forget Robert Catesby and the others have been killed. Then he started to confess, and they got the full story out of him and stuff. And he was sent to the Tower of London, and King James I agreed for all these horrible things to happen to him. And yeah, he didn't actually, when they went to hang him, he climbed up the ladder and they put the rope around his neck, and then he jumped. He didn't wait to be pushed, he jumped, and apparently that meant that he then died before they hung. They get hung first, and then they draw the blood out of you, and they caught you, and then I think they started off as well. Another thing they did, they stuck him on the back of a carriage and pulled his body round town like you do, type of things. Like, oh my goodness, it was the most horrific things. Like they're accusing him of being horrific, but the things they did to him, oh my goodness, it was awful. So because we know the date, and the Julian Calendar will tell us, and we know what time of day it was. Apparently, it was about 30 minutes into the new day of the 5th of November that they went back down and discovered him. So I thought, let's have a look at the chart of that. So for the 5th of November 1605, using the Julian Calendar, we've got a Virgo ascendant. And what I thought was quite interesting was that meant that Neptune, which was in Virgo, was exactly on the ascendant. So can you imagine you're underneath the Houses of Parliament and it's dark, and the person that you're talking to first of all goes, "Oh, my name's John Johnson," which it isn't. His name's Guy Fawkes. So there's this sort of deception, delusion. I just thought that was quite a fitting planet to have rising whilst nobody knew who he was or what the plan was. He quite quickly told them that he was planning on blowing up the Parliament and killing the king because he didn't like the king. And the sun's in Scorpio, the moon's conjunct Jupiter. I'm using equal house, so the moon's conjunct Jupiter in the 5th house in Capricorn. Saturn and Venus are in Sagittarius. Sun's in Scorpio, which it is now. And Mercury's in Scorpio conjunct Chiron. And then Uranus, the planet of sudden things, is up there in the 9th house. That's the house of legal things. And Uranus is about sudden happenings. He's retrograde at that point. Pluto's in Aries, retrograde in the 8th house of secrets. So I thought that was a pretty fitting thing for what would have been a massive explosion. It would have been enormous. 36 barrels of gunpowder is a hell of a lot of gunpowder. And if he had lit the fuse, it would have gone poof. And not only would they have killed, because that was another thing they were arguing about when they were working it all out, stuff, that other people that were sympathetic to the Catholic cause would also be killed, that would have been in Parliament as well. It's like, oh my goodness. So in the chart of the actual gunpowder plot itself is a grand trine, which is Mars's 1 degree into Libra, but it's uniting the other 2 earth signs, which is Uranus in Taurus and moon conjunct Jupiter in Capricorn. But I thought it was rather fitting that you got Pluto, the planet of deep change and transformation, in the 8th house of secrets. And he didn't, first of all, even say what his name was. And he wouldn't, this Guy Fawkes now, he wouldn't reveal, this is the moon in Leo, he's been so brave, he wouldn't reveal the name of the other conspirators. He just absolutely refused, obviously, until they beat the living daylights out of him. So I found a fabulous quote in The History of Western Astrology by Nicholas Campion. And I'll just read that to you because I thought it was rather interesting. So we do know that Shakespeare's landlady had a famous astrologer, Simon Forman, cast her horoscope. So Shakespeare wrote a lot of astrology in his plays. and what Nicholas is discussing here, did he believe what he was saying? Did he believe in astrology? Well, I'm not going to make a comment on that. But what I thought was interesting, he said, Charles Nichols provides an analysis of King Lear as an alchemical journey, but touches only lightly on astrology. However, this is another author now, F.E. Hallidale proposed a provocative historical connection. According to Hallidale, Shakespeare was writing Lear, this is King Lear now, in the autumn of 1605. Okay, Gunpowder plot is 1605. And it was on the 5th of November 1605 that Guy Fawkes was arrested in the Gunpowder plot and accused of conspiring to blow up Parliament and the King and the entire British government. Hallidale writes that the moon indeed portended no good. There was an eclipse on the 27th, and only a fortnight before there'd been a total eclipse of the sun. In the resulting governmental reaction, new oppressive laws were introduced. Fawkes was savagely tortured and executed, and Roman Catholics forbidden to proselytize, I think that means like preach and stuff, on pain of death. And this sort of goes into the writing of King Lear. So Shakespeare was actually writing the play whilst this was going on. So it obviously hit the news, which it would do. So using the chart that I've created, which I don't know if it's 100% accurate, we got the date. It was all happened on the 5th of November. They had to go to court. They tortured him first and they got all the information. And then they tried him and then they found him guilty and then they did various other horrible things to him. And then eventually they killed him and the others. I can't remember how many others it was that were left at that point. On the 31st of January 1606. So it all goes wrong in November. All the horrible things happen to him in December. They've got to do all the legal things and they strung it out quite a bit. He doesn't actually get executed until the 31st of January. So we've got those dates and I've created the chart. And natally he had, and this wouldn't be affected by the date going a few days either way. The degree of Venus wouldn't have shifted that much. So natally Venus is 24 degrees Aries. Pluto is now 27 degrees into the sign of Aries. So if I've got this chart right, he's a sun sign Taurus. The ruler to Taurus is Venus. The day of his persecuted death, because they're going to hang him, not just, imprison him. Transiting Pluto is as conjunct as you can get to his natal Venus. Venus is also in Aries, so he's not quite having a Venus return, but it's there. The moon is in Pisces, which it was on the day that Robert Catesby was shot. So the moon is back, and he natally, so this is Guy now, regardless of the date of birth, has natal Pluto in the sign of Pisces and transiting moon. So you can, I don't know if you can, but me as an astrologer, I'm looking at Pluto's exactly conjunct Venus, transiting moon is exactly conjunct Pluto. This isn't a happy experience. This is deep change and transformation. Like Wolf, he goes off to heaven or wherever. He's having a Jupiter return because natally had Jupiter in Aquarius. Jupiter has now returned to Aquarius on the 31st of Jan. The Sun is in Aquarius as well. Chiron's in Aquarius and transiting Sun's conjunct Chiron. What was the other one? Uranus is in Taurus, which Uranus is 22 degrees. So it will be forming a square to his natal Mars, which is 26 degrees Leo. But, is there such a thing as a chart as I'm just going to be hung? I would have thought Pluto would be involved in it. Transiting Saturn is exactly conjunct to his Uranus. His natal Uranus is 3 degrees retrograde into Capricorn. Again, that wouldn't have changed that much if the date of birth was a few days either way. So transiting Saturn is now in Capricorn 4 degrees. His natal Uranus is 3 degrees. Uranus is sudden change. Saturn is reality. Mars is in Scorpio. That is a Scorpio. We're going to hang somebody. That's a Mars in Scorpio thing. Transiting Chiron is conjunct Mars. And lastly, I don't know his exact date of birth or his time, but the chart is telling me for that date, if I got it right, the North Node is in Virgo 6 degrees, and transiting Neptune is now 10 degrees, but I'm not going to argue about that one. But transiting Neptune being 10 degrees Virgo and transiting Mercury being 2 degrees Pisces and retrograde, both of those planets were in opposition to each other. So nothing's clear, everything's shady. There's retrograde having to redo. He's born natally with Mercury retrograde, which again wouldn't change. I can't use the ephemeris, but I'll move the chart backwards and forwards. He 99% sure was born with Mercury retrograde, and he dies on a Mercury retrograde. It's just that. Oh yes, and transiting Neptune is squaring his natal Neptune. But I thought the Pluto things were, and the Mars transiting in Scorpio were quite demonstrative of the horrible death that he suffered. So one last thing to say: why do people celebrate Bonfire Night or Guy Fawkes Night? An Act of Parliament passed in the months following the plot ensured that the failure of the Gunpowder plot would be marked every year. Churches' attendance on the 5th of November was made compulsory under the terms of the Act, and congregations had to give thanks for the failure of the conspirators. So, they even brought in an act that forced you to go to church to celebrate the fact that nobody got blown up. It's like, eek. But over the years, the whole concept of Guy Fawkes and what he does or doesn't represent has altered, as the idea goes that he's probably considered a bit of an anti-hero today. People do wear masks that are supposed to look like him and stuff. But I wanted to, in this episode, explore the astrology of what was going on then and where the outer planets were, because as I've said it before and I'll say it again, I think where the outer planets are, we mustn't ignore what they do and where they're up to. And people that always, when people are born with personal planets conjunct the outer planets, they're in a sense sort of spokespeople in a way, and will live lives that are more attuned to the outer planet than it might be to their sun sign. I mean, Pisces, as I said earlier, they're the sign of the zodiac that's more likely to get caught up in something really ridiculous. But he was born with Sun conjunct Pluto, so he really almost lived the whole of his life under a Pluto shadow, so to speak, because he doesn't know any different. He's born Sun conjunct Pluto. He's going to do those Pluto-y type of things, whilst Mr. Fawkes himself doesn't really have any outer planetary things. So him getting caught up in this whole conspiracy, was he fated for that to happen? Rhetorical question. We won't know because we don't know his exact date of birth for sure, or his time of birth. But it's your Robert Catesby, if you want to blame, is the person that started it all. But nobody put a gun to his head and told Guy Fawkes now. Nobody put a gun to his head and told him to do it for whatever reasons. He joined into the escapade of it all, which he came to a nasty end. Definitely, I would not have wanted to have lived back then. Okay, it must have been a bit sort of on the horrific side. And the idea that you'd chop a body up and then you'd stick the person's head on a spike and put that outside the Houses of Parliament, if that isn't sort of pushing a point home rather super strong. And also, people regularly were hanged in public. In public, you would stand there and watch somebody go to the other side. And I don't know, did people clap? Ugh, don't know. I'm sure things haven't changed in certain countries, and it happens even now, but it's just like... So today we've been talking about the Gunpowder plot and the astrology involved in it. Some of what I've given you is accurate, some of it is conjecture, but I have got all of the links to where I got the information from are in the show notes if you want to check them out for yourself. And I hope you have a fab week, and I hope when you get to Guy Fawkes Night you have a lovely evening. So I'll be back next week. Bye bye now.